Let's see, we up? All right, and hey, we're up, great. So today we're talking about the Asterisk REST interface, which was introduced in Asterisk 12. But specifically, we're actually talking about what it takes to use that interface to build a fully featured, rich communications application. Okay, so who am I? I'm Matt. Nice to meet you guys. You might know who I am. I'm an Asterisk developer. They still let me touch code every now and again. I'm a manager at Digium. Primarily, my background was in lower level languages, so C, Asterisk, but also I've done C++ in my career, some other languages as well. Sam, on the other hand.
Hello, I'm Sam. I've been a web application developer for the last 7 or 8 years. I'm very, very new to Asterisk. We're talking like 8 months or so. I've only really worked with higher level languages, so that's kind of my background. Very, very different from the traditional Asterisk development core team.
And as is the case, being a good manager, the person who actually wrote the rich communication application was Sam. I had very little to do with the actual writing of the thing that we're going to be talking about today. One of the highlights of what we're going to be showing, though, is that yes, you still have to know what Asterisk is. You have to know something about the system that you're building on top of, but you can treat Asterisk as an engine of media communication. You don't have to know all the inner workings of Asterisk. You don't have to be an expert in Asterisk style plan to build something really cool using the language of your choice. Okay, so who in the room knows what ARI is? A handful. Some people don't. That's cool. So it is a RESTful interface. It was introduced in Asterisk 12. It's received a lot of development attention over the past year. And if I was trying to describe the purpose of this API, it's not meant as a replacement for the other Asterisk APIs. It's not meant as a replacement for AMI. It's not meant as a replacement for AGI. You may find that you replace some things that you traditionally did with those APIs using ARI, but we were not looking to obsolete those APIs. It sits sort of in between the two. If you look at AMI as being used for call control or AGI being used to control a channel executing dial plan, ARI is about sort of sitting in the middle there of building your own custom communications application. Prior to ARI, you would have to use a combination of AMI and AGI in order to achieve that task. ARI lets you do it by itself without having to rely on those other APIs. One of the best ways of describing it is, people have asked when we first started doing it, well, how can I send a channel into voicemail with ARI? And well, that's not actually what it's for. It's so that you can write your own voicemail, so that you can build your own voicemail application using Asterisk and using the primitives of an Asterisk without actually having to go redirect a channel into the dial plan or do other kinds of things. So there's two parts really to ARI. There is the RESTful interface, which is sort of that little top part on the slide there. We're going to create a channel, so we do a post, an HTTP post to the channels resource. We specify that we want an endpoint of PJ-SIP Alice, and we say, stick it in my test application. And we get back a nice little 200 OK response, which tells us, okay, yep, I made you the Alice channel, and it's off to your application. But REST does not assume that we live in an asynchronous world. Communications is asynchronous. We don't control when somebody hangs up the phone, right? So there's a WebSocket component to the ARI interface as well. And the WebSocket is what gives the application state about what's going on inside of Asterisk. So you will also get nicely encoded JSON events that tell you about what's going on with your channel while it's in your application. So in this particular case, we have a status start event, which says, okay, this is when the channel went into the application and its current state is up and it's in my application test. And as things happen to the channel, if the user hangs up the channel, you're going to get you get a status end event first because that just leaves your application. Then you might get a channel destroyed event, and it tells you what's going on while you're trying to control the channel in the application. Okay, so, and this is a dangerous slide because somebody's going to quote me on this, and then I'll have a flame war on the mailing list where they'll be like, he's trying to kill app voicemail, he put it on a slide. You know, it's tongue in cheek. So we want to enable people to build their own voicemail application without having to write things in C, right? What's one of the limitations of app voicemail? It has hard-coded IVRs in it. If I wanted to change the IVR or change a digit, I have to go hack on C and remove some lines in app voicemail in order to go do that. We would rather give somebody all of the tools that they need to go build their own voicemail application and let them build their own IVRs, customize how they want things to happen, customize what they expose to their users, and let them go build their own featureful applications. When I say kill app voicemail, it's just kind of a funny way of saying it. We want people to go, if app voicemail provides everything you need, great, go use it. It's always going to be there. That's fantastic. If it doesn't, here's all the tools that you need to go build your own app voicemail. So this is my stick figure analogy with a gigantic no through it. Often when you look at examples for APIs or for building things, you see what I call the stick figure examples. It is the, hey, here's our API, and in 3 lines you can do this nifty thing, right? You're like, oh, that's really cool, that's very helpful. That is not what we're going to show you today. There are other great talks here. Matt Riddell has a talk about building applications using ARI. There's some other really good resources out there for doing sort of that introduction to ARI. That's not what we're talking about. We're actually going to show you something that's a bit past that. We're going to show you, okay, we're going to talk about the lessons we learned from building a production level application on top of ARI, which not surprisingly turns out that there's a lot more you need to do than just relying on manipulating the things going on in Asterisk with ARI. And to that, I'll hand it over to the guy who actually did the work.
Yay, my turn. So apparently this mic doesn't work. Sorry about that. And before I start, I have a bit of a cough going, so apologize if I start coughing in the middle of this. So a few months ago, I started building a voicemail application with Node.js and ARI. And at the very high level, my goals were to separate the application into 2 modules, to have a pluggable database architecture. Right now it supports Postgres and SQLite, but it'd be pretty easy to add something else. I wanted to be configurable, so like the prompts that play throughout the app, or the DTMF that control the menus, things like that. And I wanted a modular design, so if there's anything you don't like, you could replace just part of it, and the rest of it would still work. Very, very high level, this is kind of what it looks like. We have a voicemail stasis app and a voicemail main stasis app. They're completely different modules that can be run on different servers. They each use an auth module that makes sure that the mailbox ID actually exists and it gets you a mailbox and it validates your password, in theory, because it doesn't do that right now. There's a mailbox module that takes care of reader-writer, leaving messages, listening to messages, and then those modules further utilize other modules to kind of abstract out things, like the data access layer, which is pretty obvious. And then we have a prompt module to kind of extract out playing sounds in a sequence and being able to stop them at any point, which turned out to be more of a pain than I thought it would. There's a notification module, which right now only does MWI, but it could do email notifications or webhooks to third-party systems, stuff like that. There's a configuration module, which is kind of boring and really self-explanatory. And then the very first thing I built before this was a client for Node.js for ARI. That kind of abstracts out all the HTTP calls, the WebSocket events, registering them, things like that. So just out of curiosity, how many people here have played around with Node.js at all? Oh, good. Actually better than I thought. Not bad. So just to kind of explain why we picked Node.js, as Matt said earlier, Asterisk is very asynchronous. We live in an asynchronous world. With Node.js, we get asynchronous I/O APIs for free, which is really nice. The event emitter pattern maps really, really well to WebSocket events. It lets you register event handlers really easily and then emit those events from different parts of the app. Node is single-threaded, which is a bit, it's hard to wrap your head around. But all I/O is done asynchronously, but all CPU-bound operations are actually single-threaded, so it's really easy to think about concurrency. At any point, there's really just one thread going. And finally, and this is a really big part, Node Package Manager has tons of useful modules that we can use already. The voicemail app that I built uses something like 10 or 15 already. So as I built this, I've learned a few lessons, things to not do, things to do, best practices, things like that. Your mileage may vary. Some of it is specific to Node, but overall it should be pretty universal. The most important thing is use a client library. Don't do all that work yourself. You could, but it's a lot easier to abstract out making HTTP calls and handling WebSocket events.
Real quick to that point too, there are lots of really great client libraries already available for ARI in a variety of languages.
Not just for Node.
At Digium, we've worked on a Python one and the one for Node, but the community has also worked on ones for Ruby, for Java, for .NET even. So there, and of course Near with PHP ARI. So there's a lot of options already available there for client libraries for ARI.
Yes. So one big thing with a client is you usually get fully formed objects, which you can then use to make further calls. So for example, if I get a channel, I can use my object to then play something on the channel, and that's all abstracted out. I don't have to worry about exactly how it works on the back end. And some of these libraries, not all, but some support namespacing events. So sometimes I care about, I want a DTMF for a specific channel, or I want to know that a specific playback ended. I don't want to have to go through every single event and have to go through to figure out this is the one I care about. A lot of these client libraries will abstract that out, so you can do specifically channel on whatever the event is, and you'll only get it for the resource you care about. So another big lesson, and this comes back to asynchronous operations again, specify IDs whenever you create a resource, whether it's a channel, which would be originating, or if you're creating a playback, or if you're creating a recording. And the reason for this is that if your application controls the IDs, you can actually register event handlers before you make the call to create the resource. Sometimes it's possible the WebSocket event could return before the HTTP call does, at which point, if you didn't do this, you would just lose the event, which is really, really bad. Another big lesson is to think about modules. For example, the app we have, handling messages, that's its own thing. Authentication is its own thing. Controlling playback is its own thing. You could reuse them if you wanted to, or you could replace them. It's pretty easy. That leads to code reuse. So both voicemail and voicemail main use the same auth module. They use the same module for handling mailboxes, just does things slightly differently. But also, you could theoretically use the auth module in a completely different app. It doesn't have to be specifically for a voicemail application, which is really nice. Thinking in modules helps maintainability. So as long as you expose a consistent API, you really just have to worry about your module when you're working on it. The rest of the world doesn't really apply, which also makes things a lot easier to test. You can test them in isolation. You don't have to have a test that encompasses the entire application. So this is like super scientific because the Node.js app doesn't do probably half of what voicemail does. But right now, app voicemail is in one file, and it's about 12,000 lines of code. The Node.js app is in 11 different modules, and it's roughly 3,000 lines of code.
And to that point, voicemail is one of those things where you can find yourself in requirements creep very quickly and have things start to slip away. And suddenly you started off with this nice, thin module and everything's great, and all of a sudden you've got 9,000 lines of unmaintainable code. When you're working on building out a communications application using ARI, you want to plan some for the future on how you're going to keep things maintainable. And splitting things out into core constituent parts like we've done with this application really helps that, so that we don't have the state machine that is maintaining the prompt state bleeding into my code that is trying to manage MWY or send out an email notification.
Yes, very good point. Just because it doesn't do everything voicemail does not mean that I would want it one day to do that. But anyway, take that as you may. Another big thing I ran into is a lot of operations in ARI are not atomic. So one big pain point for me, and this is specific to voicemail, there might be other areas depending on what you're building where you run into this, but the API to update a mailbox count is not atomic. You basically give it the mailbox name, the count for old messages, and the count for new messages. So what happens if someone leaves the message about the same time that the mailbox owner happens to be listening to messages? So what we have here, this is like completely a theoretical mailbox, but we've got 0 old messages and we have 1 new message. So Alice happens to dial to the voicemail application, which is going to update the new messages to 2, and at the same time, Bob decides he's going to listen to his messages. So for him, it's going to update the old messages to 1 and the new messages to 0. So the interesting thing here is we could be in one of 2 cases after they hang up. And the problem is it doesn't matter which state we're in, it's going to be wrong. Either Alice is going to overwrite Bob or vice versa. So the big takeaway from this, use database locking or some other external mechanism to ARI in your application so you can ensure consistency. Now this is the part that's very, very, very specific to Node. Depending on what you use to build ARI application, this may not apply to you at all. But Node has a big problem with callback hell. The way that asynchronous operations return is you have to provide a callback, and that gets called whenever the async application or the async operation ends. So pretty quickly you get nested calls, and it's a nightmare. Promises, on the other hand, are an object that kind of represent a sequential flow of operation that will eventually return. And this is what it looks like. So callbacks, every time you have to nest further, and every time you have to check for errors. And this only goes in a few operations. I've seen way, way, way worse.
So real quick, does anybody use promises in Node.js apps that are in the room? Few hands. Okay, cool. Has anybody ever used Python Twisted? Does that ring a bell? Okay, are you familiar with deferreds in Python Twisted? Same kind of thing.
Yes.
And if you are using asynchronous frameworks, this is a massive save to prevent you from writing the gigantic nested thing. And you know, 3 nested here, it's like, well, that's livable, but we've certainly seen code where...
Well, that's because it's a slide.
Right,
I have to
12, 14 layers deep, and I just keep on adding more event callbacks, and then you come back a month later, and you're like, oh my gosh, what actually is happening here?
Yes, as opposed to the promise example at the bottom where everything flows very nicely on the same level, and I can catch errors at the bottom if I want, which is very, very nice. The final big takeaway I ran into is almost every single module I showed earlier internally is implemented as a state machine. So the main reason for this is, again, WebSockets are synchronous. Kind of sound like I'm repeating myself a lot. But finite state machines are a nice way to control what triggers a state change. So that way you can get consistency through our application by defining predefined states and then defining how those transitions occur, which most of the time is going to be through a WebSocket event. You can also guard against certain things occurring before your application is in a ready state, so you can load things from database, kind of queue things up, and once you're ready, then start processing whatever came in asynchronously. And it's a nice way to encapsulate registering and unregistering event handlers. So what I found a lot is if you don't unregister event handlers, that's a memory leak. There's no way for Node.js to know that that won't get called later. So I basically have a bootstrapping step where I do all these event handlers that I need to handle whatever the model's going to do. And then once I get to a completed state at the end, I kind of clean all that up and tear everything down, basically.
So going back to some more audience participation, how many are familiar with the state design pattern in object-oriented programming? Does that ring a bell? Hands up. 2, 3, 4, few? Okay.
Not too bad.
Very much that, right? So what you'll find is that as I'm traversing through an IVR, I keep changing states, right? I'm in menu 1, and then I go to listen to my messages, and I'm in another menu. And it's valid for me to hit a DTMF in that menu, but not in the previous menu. And so using a state pattern to keep where that person is in the application becomes very fundamental to keeping your application code sane. As it turns out, that's a very useful thing for most communications applications, even things like a conference bridge, right? You may have a participant who's in a holding area, and then they transition into being a full participant in the conference. And so you have these different states that the participants move through. This ends up being a very fundamental thing to almost every communications applications we've written. So if you're evaluating libraries and things, look for something that helps you out here. What was the library you ended up using for the finite state machines?
I use Machina.js. But there's a bunch of different ones for Node, and there's libraries for just about every language out there. And yeah, again, I guess it's not that complicated, but I would use a library for a state machine. I wouldn't implement my own. The one I picked, the main thing I want is it has very easy built-in ability to queue events. So I wanted to be able to queue DTMFs coming in, but then not actually handle them until the application's in the right state. So that turned out to be really, really helpful. Are we ready for the very dangerous demo?
Let's do a dangerous demo.
Very, very dangerous demo.
So just to show the setup a little bit, we're on the Wi-Fi, so that's the first part of this that is crazily dangerous. And Asterisk is actually running on my machine.
Yes.
And Sam has very little knowledge about how it's configured, other than I have a small amount of dial plan that puts a channel into the Stasis application, which hands it off to his ARI application. So I've got an entry point for leaving a voicemail, and I've got an entry point for checking voicemail. And I've made one PJ-SIP account for him to be able to register a soft phone to. And other than that, this is essentially a black box from the perspective of his communications application.
Right, and the Node.js app for both voicemail and voicemail main run on my laptop as well as the soft phone. So I'll be going back and forth. Well, if it works, we'll see. So first thing, I'm going to call the extension to leave a voicemail. And I don't know how the audio is going to go with this. Might be interesting. Assuming it works. Something happened. Yeah, I just knew this would happen.
Oh, I got bumped off the Wi-Fi.
Well, there you go.
The server is gone. Give me just a second.
It's not my fault, I guess. Yeah.
James, do I get a prize for it failing miserably? Harsh.
Yes. One more reason to use a Mac, I guess.
Oh, wow, look at that. A slam on Linux. Don't worry, everybody. It's the year of Linux on the desktop yet again.
Yeah, for like 2 decades now.
Yeah, it always looks better when you fail at first and then make it work. So
If you say so, I'll take your word on that.
it always looks better that way.
Sure, okay.
Okay, I think my IP address is still the same. So, all right, let's see if you can't connect up. Hey.
It appears to be the same. Okay.
Okay, and I just saw his status application register.
So my apps are running now. Yeah. Maybe.
Yeah, you're going.
The audio's not working. Everyone yell or something. All right. So now we should have a message.
Yep, we do. And you can see, by the way, the MWI count on his soft phone now displays that he has one new message. What's interesting, by the way, that mailbox, so this is one of the cool things that got added to ARI in the past couple versions. Actually, it was a point release in 12, but really it's new in 13. We now allow for external control of MWI through any application. So his application actually told Asterisk, you have a new message, and it just says, I guess you have a mailbox that is this URI. I'll just make that up, and it sends out a notify request to the soft phone, and off it goes. There is no app voicemail. There's no app voicemail controlling the mailboxes. There's no voicemail.conf. It's all just being dictated by the external application.
All right, so now we have left the message, so I'm going to pretend I'm the mailbox owner now, and I'm going to try and listen to it.
You have one new message. Press 1 for new messages. First message.
One yell or something. Yeah. There we go. Yay.
To repeat the current message.
So according to you, that was a better demo because we made it work?
I know, and so that's the funny part, right? So what we've actually based, ow, by the way, burn.
Yeah.
I don't know, do you want to bring up the
I used all
code?
the same prompt, so it is kind of hard to tell.
Bring up the code. Bring up the code.
Okay.
We did do something, right? It's not just app voicemail. And if he pulls up C code and it looks like app voicemail, it's not. No, it's okay.
No, it won't. It won't look like that. All right, let me think. Which one would be? Let's see, that one probably.
Nothing like forcing a presenter to go off script, by the way.
I don't really mind. Oh, this is going to be fun. I can't really see what this looks like, by the way, so let me know if it makes no sense at all. And this is all Node.js code. That's the finite state machine that takes care of writing messages to the mailbox.
And so, yeah, I mean, this is sort of some nice things in here, too, that you can see. For example, it says, hang up the channel. It registers a function for that, catches any errors, goes down. Well, that's actually what Sam was talking to about removing listeners when a channel has been hung up in order to make sure that it doesn't leak memory.
You will run out of memory.
These are the kinds of things that you may or may not have to do in a particular language or whatever you choose to do to go to implement it. But these are things that you should be aware of when you're actually building something that has event listeners and handlers, is that even though it's easier because it's JavaScript, you still have to be cognizant of the domain of the language that you're working in and make sure that you clean up things, because it's up to you. Asterisk isn't going to do anything for you. It already destroyed the channel. You have to make sure that you clean up the resources that you tied to its lifetime.
Yes, but putting that or wrapping it in the state machine was way, way easier. I had to build a prototype a few months back for this, and it was nowhere near as clean as this. Let's see, recording handler. I really wish I could read this. Yeah, there are my states. There we go. Here's my bootstrapping state where I basically connect to ARI, get everything I need, stuff from database, blah, 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 blah. And then when we switch to ready, then we have the record operation, which somewhere else in the app maps to the pound key. When that gets called, then the recording gets processed. We get all the prompts, blah, 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 some nice promises. And then you can stop the prompt at any point if you want, and that's how that works. Then there's a state for stopping the prompt to make sure that anything that happens, we're in a consistent state. And this is where we're actually recording, the state for recording a message.
So one thing I want to highlight again is that, and actually, Sam, why don't you go ahead and pull up the last couple slides there.
Yes. Everything's on GitHub.
Right. So this is all open source. It's all on GitHub. And if you don't like the prompts and you want to make it sound like something other than app voicemail because you don't believe that we actually did anything, pull requests, welcome. And that is one of the great things about this. This is far more approachable to modify and customize and change for your deployment than app voicemail and see in 15,000 lines. And if you've ever looked at app voicemail, there's actually even liberal use of goto in there. So by all means, we would love for people to start playing around with this, get some ideas, and participate in it. We really are looking for this to be something that the community can take and customize and use as a replacement for some people for app voicemail.
Yeah, if you don't believe me, then haha, or something. Any questions?
Questions?
The thing when you talk and then we answer. No?
We were not that good. I mean, really. Come on, there's got to be something.
Yes.
Hi. I just wanted to know a little bit more about the ARI's event publishing. So you mentioned that it came through on a socket. Is that filtered? Is there a way to restrict how much information you get?
The question was, is there a way to restrict the amount of information that you get? And the answer is a resounding yes. So this is not the same as the AMI event pipe. ARI actually acts on a publish-subscribe model. And by default, you actually get very little. The only thing that you are generally implicitly subscribed to are the channels that enter into the application that you said your WebSocket is servicing. So other than that, you don't see the rest of the system. Now, if you want to see the rest of the system, there's an applications resource that you can subscribe to anything in the system for. So if you want to know about things that are happening outside of your application, like I need to know what the state is of all of the channels, all of the PJSIP channels. There's a way to subscribe for those, and then you receive those notifications. There's a way to terminate those subscriptions if you want to kill them. At a channel level, at a bridge level, at an endpoint level, there's all sorts of different resources that you can subscribe to and receive specific notifications for those things.
Yeah, and again, the client library kind of helps with that. If you have, you're registered to all the channel events, that's a nice way to namespace it to just what you care about.
Any other questions? Yes, Steve.
It's a slightly silly question, but I'm curious. How much did you have to add to the Astra side of ARI so that Samuel could complete his voicemail reimplementation?
No, there was two big things. The first one was that we forgot a copy operation on recording objects. And so when you make a recording, that's great, except that now I have no way to move it between folders. I have no way to duplicate the message, and that was kind of a whoops oversight. So we added a copy operation. I think the other one was we actually wanted to have message durations returned back on the recording finished event, and we originally didn't have all of the message durations that you may want. Now what you get back in a recording finished event is the total duration as well as the duration of silence and the duration of energy that was detected in the file. So you can do analysis on, well, I only want to allow messages that are 3 seconds or more and all that kind of fun stuff.
Yeah, I believe that's all that was missing.
So those were the two big ones that we encountered while we were doing this.
I was just curious about the dial plan integration with the ARI application.
The question is what does the dial plan integration look like?
It's very, very simple.
It is ludicrously simple. And I can show you on my laptop, but that's not very interesting because I'm not plugged in on the projector there. But I think Sam's got an example of it as well.
Yeah, I think I had more.
It's 3 lines of dial plan.
Yeah.
And only one of them is actually needed. The other 2 are the no-op that begins it and the hang-up that kills the channel.
Yep. Okay. So that's pretty much it.
Yeah.
Right there. 1 for each app. That's it. And then you can pass different parameters like the name of your app or the domain or the mailbox number that you care about.
I mean, if you're coming from a traditional Asterisk background, replace this with voicemail and replace this one with voicemail main, and that's pretty much what we've done here, right? They're just entry points to hand these things off to the external application to say, yes, the external application at this point now controls this channel, and here's the parameters that we're passing to it at that point. Any other questions? Those were very good questions. Okay, well, we will be here at AstriCon. If you have, obviously, I don't think we're jetting off at any point. I hope not, because I've got more talks. If you have any questions for us or have any questions about ARI or building things or anything at all, please go find us, ask us, and we'd be happy to talk to you more about this.
Or
Thank you.
digitally, if you prefer that.
Yes, we are on Twitter and IRC and all sorts of things.
Well, thank you for that. This is clearly Samuel, ably assisted by his assistant Matt.